Just like our last skill building exercise, this week's skill building exercise is broken down into several problems. Today we've got 4 what I like to call tangram puzzles, which if you've played with them when you were young, it's like a set of shapes. If you've played with tangram puzzles before, maybe when you were young, you'll know that it's a set of shapes that you have to rearrange to make some more complex shape. I'm going to break these down one by one, and the first tangram puzzle we're going to work at is this first one, Tablespoon. Each of these is kind of like a visual pun if you look closely. So the Illustrator file that I want us all to be working on for this first activity is this file here called tangramsetup.ai. An AI file means Adobe Illustrator. One of the first things you might notice with Adobe Illustrator is that you can have multiple what's called artboards. Whereas in Photoshop, when we're working on something, we're looking and we're focused on just one piece of art. Here in Illustrator, you can create several artboards. Here right now, I've got artboard 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I can be working on these 4 different graphics all at the same time within the same document. Now around these 4 artboards is this empty space, this negative space. In my screen, it's this dark gray color. Now everything that you have in the artboard is what is ready to go to either to print or to web or to export onto a movie. And everything that you have off of it will not be shown when you save these images and when you export them. So right now this text, these compound words that we're looking at, and this square, this gradient, are all outside of the artboards, and they're not going to be seen by anyone except for you. I like to keep these as like space to hide things for safekeeping for later. Often on Illustrator, I'm working on something, I'm trying things out, and if there's a version that I didn't like but I'm not ready to give it up, I'll put it over here and then try it again. Or if there's a color palette I'll keep the colors here in the artboard on the left or something like that, and I can use those colors later. We're going to be focusing on this first artboard. It's this tangram puzzle titled Tablespoon. Now, just like in Photoshop, we've got 2 sets of bars to our left and to our right. The left are our toolbars, all these different tools that helps us make and manipulate paths in Illustrator. And on the right, these are our different windows that give us different information. You'll see some overlap right here. We've got like the layers. If you've played with links before on Photoshop, you'll see that, as well as some of the type editors. But there's some other ones that are Illustrator, not specific, but more advanced, like stroke, gradient, and some of these other pieces here, like transform, align, pathfinder. The first thing you're actually going to set up is make sure that you have the pathfinder window on your right toolbar. So you can click that. Right now I have mine open, but if I didn't have it, for example, it wasn't there, I would click Window, Pathfinder to enable it, and then once it's there, I can click this and drag it and put it in there. That's like now in my drawer of all these things that I often edit. So the first tangram puzzle we're going to do is this puzzle called Tablespoon. And you'll look at it right now, and it's pretty simple. The shapes that we're working with are pretty much all rectangles, or they can be built from several sets of rectangles. If you look here on the Layers tab of Adobe Illustrator, right now I have set up 2 layers, and this is how I generally like to work. In Illustrator, I'm often taking things that I've drawn or taking things that I find on the internet, and I turn them into vectors, which allows me to modify their colors and the shapes more easily. So in this bottom layer right now, it's called layer 2 and it's red. I have it locked, but in layer 2 are all of these different tangram puzzles that I created and exported, as well as this text here. Because it's locked, I can't click on any of it, but if I were to unlock it and hover it, you could see that you can kind of click them, drag them, move them around. But I'm going to lock it because this is my goal, and so we're going to be working on layer 1 to get our paths and shapes to look like what's in layer 2. A quick keyboard command that's really helpful is called Command 0, and that centers your window on whatever artboard you select. So if I zoom out and I click on this artboard here and hit Command 0, it's going to center my whole screen on that. So the first thing we're going to be learning in Illustrator this week is how to use our shapes and how to make interesting shapes. So what we're going to focus on right now is the rectangle tool. And here it is. It should be the default shape in your toolbar. If you click that, or if you hit the letter M to activate it, you can click it and you can hover your cursor to the top left corner of this rectangle here. So I've got it here, and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it. Now when you click and drag, you'll see this blue rectangle, this blue outline rectangle appear. I'm going to bring this blue outline rectangle all the way to the bottom right corner of this rectangle. Okay, so now you'll see I've just created my first path or shape, if I is a better way to put it. I've created my first shape in Adobe Illustrator. And it's this rectangle here, and you'll notice that it is filled with white. It actually covered over this orange rectangle that I'm trying to emulate. And the outside of the rectangle is this black line. If you look in the bottom left corner, you'll see these two colors represented here. On top is this white, and it's called a fill. Fill means whatever is inside of a closed shape. And on the other part of it is this black square that's hollow. And this is called the stroke. And the stroke is the line outside of your path or shape. In this case, it's black. And over here is this little icon that says default fill and stroke. This is the default. This is every time you're making a first path in Illustrator, you're going to get something that is filled in with white and has a black line, and it is at 1 point stroke, meaning the width of this line is 1 pixel. So that's my first rectangle, and that was pretty easy. Now let's do our second rectangle. Now we could just do the same exact thing that I did, where I clicked from the top left and moved to the bottom right, but we're learning Illustrator, so I want to show us another way that we can get this rectangle. I've designed these tangrams so a lot of these elements, like these table legs, this tabletop, they repeat. So these are actually the same height. Now if I know I'm working with two shapes that are supposed to be the same height, I can just click on this, and I'm going to select this top cursor, the V selection tool. I'm going to click on it, hit Command C for copy, and then Command V to paste it. And now I have another rectangle that's identical in height and width as a one on top. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to bring it over to the left edge. And now you'll see that my shape, it's covering it perfectly because it's the same height, but the width is a little bit off. I want to make it so that this side of my rectangle matches the right side of the tabletop that I'm trying to match. Now, just like in Photoshop, if you were to click on this shape, you'll get what's called the bounding box, if you remember that. That's this blue box, and then there's these 8 white squares around it that we can click and modify to resize it. So I'm going to click on the right to toggle this one on the right center edge, and I'm going to bring it and I'm going to try to match it so it's right over the edge of my orange second tabletop. And I'm going to click out. All right. So there we are. We have my two tabletops, and I know that they're both the same height because I copied and pasted them. And now let's work on this bigger set of table legs. These table legs, you can imagine them as being 3 slender rectangles. There's a rectangle from here to here, here to here, and then here to here. So I'm going to start drawing my 3 rectangles. I've got this one. I'm going to start from the bottom, go to the top right. This one on the right is actually the same height and width as this. So just like before, I'm going to select it with this tool, hit copy with Command C, then paste with Command V, and then bring it over to the right. So now I know these 2 table legs are exactly the same, like the good carpenter I am. And then I'm going to hit M or click on the rectangle tool once more and connect them with this top rectangle like that. Okay, awesome. So now I've created these table legs, but think about any good piece of furniture. Any furniture that's strong is going to be composed of as few shapes or pieces of wood as possible. And right now, this table leg, even though it's nice and it's matching the same shape, if I were to click and drag with this top V selector, and I drag one leg of it, the rest of it's going to fall apart, and then the whole table is going to fall apart. Not going to be sturdy. What I want to do is combine these 3 shapes together. So I'm going to click on this selection tool or hit V, select my first one, and then hold down Shift and select the other 2. And you'll know they're selected because you'll have a blue dot in the center of each of them. And now what I'm going to do is go to this tab here called the Pathfinder tab. This Pathfinder tab allows us to combine or cut shapes from one another, and it lets us make much more interesting shapes than the default squares, circles, and triangles that we get. And in this Pathfinder tab, we're going to be looking at these top 4 shape modes this week. And the one I'm focused on is this one here. They all kind of show you what they're supposed to do. If you imagine you had 2 squares for each of them, and you clicked on these buttons, this is what would happen. Here, if I had 2 squares, in this case I've got 3 rectangles, and I click Unite, it's going to unite them all into one complete shape. I'm going to Control Z or Command Z so you can see what it looked like before. Before we had 3 separate shapes and you could see the lines where they separate. When you unite them, now they are one solid shape, one nice solid piece of furniture. Alright, so that's our table leg. And now what we're going to do is get our second table leg, which is smaller and shorter, but it's made out of the same width of wood. So just like before, I'm going to click on this selector, the V selection tool, and then I'm going to click on these table legs, hit Command C, and then I'm going to Command V to make another copy of it. Okay, so now I have this, and I'm going to measure this to go to the top left corner of my second set of chairs. Sorry, my second set of table legs. Now what we could do is, again using the bounding box, try to resize it to match the same height as the table legs. But one thing you'll notice and you'll run into is that when we resize it just by using the bounding box, the width of everything changes. The width of it all gets narrower the smaller you make the shape. And once I did that, now I notice that these paths are not matching what's beneath it. So I'm going to go back by hitting Command Z, and I'm going to teach us this other selection tool. So the one that we normally use is the General Select tool, which you hit with V. But there's this other select tool called Direct Selection tool, and that's A. So all of these shapes that we just created are shapes. They're all closed and they all are finished paths. And what this direct selection tool lets us do is modify all these little paths that make up one big shape. So this is a path here, this is a path from here to here, and this is a path. And all these paths end at these points called anchors. So if I select this direct selection tool, or hit A, I can click on this path here, the bottom of my left leg, and I can click and I can drag this path. And when I drag this path, it lets me make some new shapes and new forms. I want to make this path match this one so they're at the same height. So I'm going to click this path using my direct selection tool. I'll hit A to toggle direct select. Click and hold down this path. And as I'm holding this and moving it, I'm also going to hold down my shift key on the keyboard. Now you'll notice when you hold down the shift key and bring this path up and down, it's going to magnetize to this 90-degree angle. So it's going to be really hard for me to make this path go off of the original path that it's on, which is at 90 degrees. So I can click that, drag it, and bring it up to there. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Click it, hold down shift, drag it, and bring it up to that height. So now I've got these two table legs that are at the same height. But what I want to do now is bring this whole table leg so that it matches where this is. I'm going to continue using my direct selection tool. And rather than selecting just a path, what I can do is click and drag around the different paths that I want to edit. In this case, I want to edit this path here, this bottom table leg path, and then this path here. So I'm going to click that, highlight it, and now you'll see these different anchors. Normally these anchors are white like on the left, but because I've used the direct selection tool, or A, to click and select them, now these are all this blue square. And now I'm going to do the same thing as I did with these table legs to shorten them. I'm going to click here on this path, hold down shift, and bring all of this path over here. And that's going to match the top. All right, we're almost there. So now that I have my table legs, my tabletop, and then my bigger set of table legs and my bigger tabletop, what I want to do, like I mentioned with this furniture analogy, I want to make it so that all of these shapes are part of one shape. And this is where we get to this tool, and the title of our skill building exercise called compound paths. I'm going to use my V select tool and hover over all of these shapes. So I've selected everything here. They're all separate shapes, but let's think about this word compound, okay? So most words that we know are like one or two syllables, and they mean one thing. But if you look at the words of all these tangram puzzles, they're all examples of compound words. They are two words that separately mean something different, but together they mean something entirely different. In this example, we've got tablespoon. Table's a piece of furniture, a spoon is a utensil used to eat with, but together it is a spoon that you use to measure things with. So what I'm going to do is, rather than having all these different paths that are kind of floating on their own and I could move them and they could get messed up, I'm going to make them compound by using the selection tool, hovering over all of it by clicking outside of it and dragging over the top of them. And then I'm going to right click and say make compound path. Okay, so now that it's a compound path, if I click out and I click one part of this shape, they all move together. Even if I used this direct selection tool and I clicked on just one of these parts of my tables, the whole thing moves with it. It's all united as one beautiful compound path. And now the cool thing that we're going to do to test to make sure that these are all one path is change the fill of this compound path. So we're looking at it here. All these fills are white and the strokes are black. What I want to do is I want to make this compound path match the coloring of this example swatch to the left. So if I were to select it, what I'm going to do is use my eyedropper tool, which is similar to Photoshop but works a little differently. If I select my tables, hit this eyedropper tool, I'm going to get this tool toggled here. Now in Photoshop, when you use this eyedropper tool, you can use it to select the color of a pixel. In Illustrator, it does that too, but it takes it to another level, where if I were to select here and then eyedropper on this swatch, it's not just going to take the color of whatever pixel I'm looking at. It's actually going to match the appearance of the shape that I eyedroppered. So it's matching this gradient, the same gradient that's on this square here. And this swatch, this square here, didn't have a fill. That's what that symbol means. It's like a white square with a red line through it. It has a transparent stroke. It means there's nothing around it. And so now this compound path is the same as this swatch that we're looking at here. So yeah, if you did all this correctly, all these four shapes, the two sets of table legs and the two tabletops, should have the same fill as this, and when you move it around, they're all united as one group. So that's our first tangram of Tablespoon. That's going over our rectangles, our two different selection tools, and the Unite Pathfinder tool on our right.